Hi there, welcome to week 9. I hope you had a great spring break and that you're back refreshed and ready to roll. Hope you survived the midterm and are ready to start doing some critiquing of the literature. I wanted to give you a little bit of information. Your readings talk a great deal about how to write a lit review, important ways to organize it, hints for synthesizing and integrating the information. So what I wanted to do in this video is talk to you a little bit about the critiquing part, just to give you a little more basis for that as you work towards those assignments. What I'm getting this out of, I'll identify my source. This is the research methods book that I used as a graduate student at Purdue. It's called Introduction to Research. Oh, can you see it? It's called Introduction to Research, and it is by Dupuy and Gitlin, and it was published in 1994 by Mosby. So just to let you know where I'm getting it from, but I love this book, and I use it all the time. Critically evaluating the literature. This is really important because you have to know which studies are most credible so that you know which ones to emphasize in your literature review. You want to report everything, even if some outlier reports absolutely no relationship with the two variables that you hope to study. You still need to identify that literature is out there, but then you can follow it up with this critique that lets the reader know, hey, even though these guys found something completely different, this is why I think they found it. And I think that different result can be explained by the methodology or the sample or the whatever. And so the information's there, but let's exercise caution in interpreting those findings. So what are some ways you can critically evaluate the literature? Well, some questions that you can ask. Was the study clear? Unambiguous? Was it internally consistent? All the stuff that you're reading about internal validity and external validity and the different kinds of designs that you use towards that end that we read about in week 7, you have the information to be able to sort of talk about validity, reliability, and you can also be thinking about internal consistency along those same lines. What were the research questions, and were they adequately stated? Were they clearly stated? What was the purpose of the study, and how did the purpose influence the design and the conclusions? Describe the theory that guides the study and the conceptual framework for the project. Were they clearly presented and relevant to the study? So did the theoretical perspective somebody chose actually relate to the topic, and was it the best theoretical perspective to use? And if so, you know, if the theoretical perspective was used and explained clearly, why or why not was it an appropriate way to conduct that study, to base or guide that study? What were the key constructs or concepts? How were they operationalized? Were they operationalized clearly and adequately? Were the measures they used reliable, valid? Was the sample large enough, diverse enough for generalizability if it was a quantitative study? If it was qualitative, you still have those issues of reliability and validity and what rigor they used in ensuring that all that was in place. What was the rationale for the design offered in the literature review? Did the design actually answer the questions? So maybe your question was, you want to know if there's differences between men and women in their ratings of their children's behavior, but you used correlations. Well, that doesn't measure group differences. That measures a relationship. So did the method support, was the appropriate method used to answer the questions? What were the boundaries of the study? Sometimes people want to critique a study because it didn't answer a question, but it might have been a question that was beyond the scope of that particular study, and that's not a fair critique to say, well, they didn't, I wish they would have looked at how the fathers disciplined the children. Well, that was beyond the scope. It's not a fair critique. You need to stick with what was their purpose, and did they fulfill their purpose in their study. I already mentioned, reliability, validity. How did they collect their data? What techniques were used? Are those appropriate ways to collect that data, do you think? Or do you think there might have been better ways? Was there social desirability? Did they do interviews face-to-face, and people might not have wanted to answer. One of the things that we find is a limitation in the child care quality literature is that if you ask parents to if you ask them to rate their satisfaction with current child care arrangements, almost all the time they indicate high levels of satisfaction on average. And we look at that and think, how can that be so when we know the quality levels are mediocre on average? Well, there's social desirability in that question, so that could be influencing the results. So these are the kinds of things you want to think about. If you're asking a lot of teenagers about their sexual behavior, and you're interviewing them face to face, and you're their school counselor, how do you think that might influence the data that's collected? Do you think they might leave things out or not tell you certain things, as opposed to doing an anonymous survey, for example? So think about those things, the data collection techniques. How were the data analyzed? I mentioned that. Did they use the appropriate statistical analyses for the questions that they were asking? Did the analysis plan make sense? Were the conclusions supported by the study? A lot of times students just go straight to that discussion section, and that's what they report as the findings. But that's not the findings. The findings are in the results section, and sometimes people interpret their results differently than how somebody else might. So read the results and think about what you think that means in terms of implications. And then read the discussion and see, wow, they really drew a conclusion that I'm not sure is supported by the literature. That's a critique. What were the limitations of the study? Sample size, analysis plan, things like that. Sometimes there are limitations to a study because of ethical issues. We just simply can't ask that because that would be a violation of ethical behavior. So it's a limitation that we have to cite and say, it would be great if we could ask this question, but we just can't ethically, and so we have to do the best we can with what we have. What level of knowledge is generated? And then what ethical dilemmas were presented in the article? So hopefully that gives you a little bit of some hints on the critique part. But like I said, most of those questions that I just asked you that I got from this DuPuy and Gitlin book, Introduction to Research, a fabulous book, by the way. If it's a little bit old, but this was my Bible when I was doing my thesis and my dissertation in terms of how to design a research study, write a lit review. So it's a great book if you're interested in compiling more resources. I'm sure there's a more up-to-date version. It's called Introduction to Research by Elizabeth DuPuy and Laura Gitlin. Okay. So think about those questions in terms of what you already know. You have learned so much from the Babbie text so far, and you still have, more that you'll learn, but you really do you've already had the instruction and the readings related to how to answer each of those questions. So really think back to the stuff that we've read about in Babbie in terms of design and methodology, experimental design, survey research, measurement issues, ethics, all those things, and use that knowledge to answer those, to think about how to critique the articles based on some of those questions. And those are certainly not the only questions one can ask when critiquing the literature, but it's hopefully a little way for you to get started a bit. Your literature reviews are due on April the 14th by 5 p.m. That is during week 11, so you definitely have some time to get going on those. Hopefully this information also helps you a bit with your qualitative and quantitative critiques that are due at the end of this session on March 31st. Remember that next week we'll be having our chats, and although the syllabus does indicate that you'll have a qualitative and a quantitative chat, we've decided that it really makes more sense to just do one. So you just sign up for one chat time, and Alan and I will take turns moderating those. And you will come with questions for each other, and talking about comparing and contrasting the two articles that you read and the methodologies, and critiquing them, talking about answering some of those questions that I just outlined for you. So good luck to you. If you have any questions, let me know. As always, Alan and I are online and ready and waiting to hear from you and help you through this process.